morning, I'm John Bolton. I'm the legal representative in a matter in the High Court which challenges the constitutional validity of the Victorian Racial and Religious Tolerance Act, under which 3 men were convicted and fined $2,000. It's my position that that law is invalid. It is against our constitutional protections for free speech in the political arena. I'm about to go and file.
Well, now we're face to face with John Bolton. He's a barrister and a solicitor, worked and registered in South Australia, but worked in Victoria and Queensland, and also a very passionate advocate for free speech. But he's going to tell us something about a law that the Victorian government put in place in 2001.
Yes.
That enables Muslims to do some work that puts them apart from others. And also, it was basically the Victorian government putting in place something that was passed by the United Nations Human Rights Council when Saudi Arabia, that beacon of freedom, was chairing.
They only beheaded 147 people in 3 months for what they call terrorism in Saudi Arabia, which includes criticising the government and the royal family.
So what's the title of this act in Victoria, and what do you call it?
Well, I call it the Islamic Blasphemy law, because it virtually mirrors the United Nations Human Rights Council resolution that where Saudi Arabia and the Islamic State of Saudi Arabia and Pakistan pushed through the resolution, which our federal government declined to pass. Although they wanted all member states of the UN to sign up, our federal government declined to pass, but the Victorian government passed such a law. It prevents criticism of Islam. It's never been used to prevent criticism of Christianity or any other religion. It's only been used in this one case.
Well, Christians would welcome free speech and being criticised, so long as it's done respectfully.
Well, Christians are criticised all the time, aren't they? You know, do you remember the Piss Christ, where people were actually urinating on the image of their saviour? And of course, nobody got beheaded over that. Nobody got prosecuted over that.
So what's happened in Victoria, and what are you doing?
Well, what's happened in Victoria, they passed a law which prevents people from doing something which incites other people to think bad things about a religion.
So I have to be responsible for your feelings with the words I use?
You have to be responsible for causing me to think bad things about Islam, and that's what these people have been charged with. Charged, convicted and fined $2,000 each.
So you've taken up their case, and you've got a matter, you can appeal on 2 grounds, constitutional grounds and also fact.
That's correct.
So you've chosen the first because you believe this contradicts the Constitution, fundamental rights in our country.
They were unrepresentative. One of them appealed to the county court. I've stepped in and been asked to act at that point. I determined there's a constitutional issue as well as a factual issue. I think factually the prosecution don't prove the case, so we reserve our right to run that.
Hence the High Court.
And the constitutional issue is the High Court, and the High Court, I say, will protect freedom of speech, but people have to stand up for themselves as well and take the matter to the High Court. So in each state where there is one of these laws, and it's all but bar 2, people have to stand up, push the margin before it can be tested in the High Court. And that's a real problem which the High Court recognised in Bob Brown's case in Tasmania only in November last year.
So can you tell us something about what you see as the Constitution and the way it protects freedom, and how governments can't impinge on those freedoms without taking some responsibility?
We have great freedoms in Australia. The High Court repeatedly says an Australian is free to do whatever a person can conceive of doing unless a responsible government has passed a law regulating it. That's our starting position. We don't have to wait for Di Natale or Hanson Young to tell us what our rights are. Our rights as Australian are to do everything unless our elected government regulates it. And it's the same for speech. We have
So just to break in there, so guns, driving a car, speaking freely?
We have a fundamental right to drive a car. We have a fundamental right to have a firearm. But of course those things have to be regulated, and we elect a government to regulate them for us.
So going back to freedom of speech, how are freedoms protected there?
Well, people often wrongly say there is no right to free speech in Australia. That's not true. The High Court said it repeatedly in the last 118 years. We start off with the right to free speech, and governments who regulate it have to be very careful and precise about how they regulate it. It's even more protected by the High Court when it comes to political discourse, because the High Court says our constitution is a democracy. We have a vote. It's not possible for people to determine how they're going to vote unless they have free speech to talk about political issues which they might be asked to elect a government on. That's why they're very careful. They say that, of course, governments can still make regulations that might burden this right to political free speech, but they've got to be so careful, and they must only go the minimum length necessary. And the High Court will balance what the government's trying to do with the right to free speech. There's a case at the moment regarding the 150 metre zones around abortion clinics, where this very issue is being raised. I believe those laws will be found to be valid. I hope I'm right about that now, but I think that the High Court is going to say, hold on, women who are pregnant, who are going to get some medical advice or procedure are very fragile, and all that's happening is freedom of speech is being restricted in a very small 150 metre zone around that space. They can protest wherever they like, they can politic wherever they like about...
And in Australia, people can appeal that they can represent both sides.
Yes.
So, well, represent one side, but both sides are entitled to a hearing. So this has been driven because some people were arrested and charged and found guilty and fined as a result of protesting against Islam.
What their stated intention was, and it's recorded on the transcript in the Magistrates Court, their stated intention was to bring attention to a rally that they were conducting a week later.
So that's a normal part of political and social discourse in this country.
Well, everybody knows that the issue of building mosques and the issue of Islam in Australia is a highly topical issue. We know that local government councillors will get elected on it, state government people will get elected on it, federal government people will get elected on it. That's why I say it's at the heart of political discourse, a very topical issue, and I think the High Court is going to say we're allowed to talk about it.
Good, okay. And John, we have to congratulate you for starting the International Freedom of Speech Day, which was held 2 weeks ago. You got events in Melbourne, Sydney, and also in London. And that is, you can see, this man is passionate about freedom of speech because it is a fundamental right to being free in our country.
The reason it's important is because it's the way that we think. We're having this conversation now, it's going to be unedited, and as we go we're thinking about what we want to say. That's how we think, by speaking. And so to restrict you from using words restricts the way you think, and this is what the postmodernist neo-Marxists want to do.
Wonderful point, and we'll finish on that because this is about controlling speech and about controlling thought and belief. And that's what we face in this country. We need to keep Australia free. Thank you very much, John, not only for what you're doing, but how you're doing it.
Thanks very much for having me.